today's Comic Books and You. Today we're talking about Thorgal Volume 6, Part 2. Le métal qui n'existe pas, the metal that which doesn't exist. Or that doesn't exist. I'm not. I mean, I'm just an English major. Don't expect me to be that good in English. So there's no specific cover for this particular part of the story like we discussed in Part 1. I just put the cover from the volume here. Of course, a lot of bits in this cover are in this particular bit. Thorgal with the large sword, the dwarf, the goddess, the snake. All of those things will be seen in this bit of the volume. So we're going to go over the characters real quick. We do see Thorgal in this one. Thorgal is the main character in this story, even though he's assisting Chazi, the dwarf. He is the one that allows Chazi to complete his quest. Even though he is fairly young, he's still shown as an outsider and a loner in the Viking society. Through this story, we see already his kindness and his generosity, and we also show his courage by wanting to accompany the dwarf into to finish his quest. So those are two of the important traits of the character that would go throughout his entire life. So we see that this is a character that had those traits from a very, very young age. I would say the actual protagonist of this story is Chazi, who is the youngest and bravest of the dwarves, who is sent on the quest to find the metal that which doesn't exist. He is kind and ready to do everything to get the metal, even performing unkind acts. But he is shown as a resourceful, smaller person. The last fairly important character in this story is Nidhogg, the snake, a mythological creature of Norse mythology. He's one of Thorgal's greatest nemesis throughout the entire run, never truly defeated as a divine creature like this would be. He is represented as scheming, envious. It's implied that he cheated at the start of the story. If we go a little bit deeper, we can see here that those are the negative traits that are repeated on evil characters in the earlier Thorgal stories. Scheming, envious, narcissistic, avidity. So all those negative traits we've seen in Gandalf le Fou. Now we're seeing it in Nidhogg as well. We're going to go through the story real quick. So it starts with the King of Dwarves losing a game of checker against Nidhogg, a game in which he gambled his name away. In a plea to the Serpent, he attempts to get his name back and tries to say, like, well, us dwarves are masters of the underworld and we can get you anything you want. Nidhogg gives him 1,000 years to find the metal which doesn't exist. As a response, the king appoints Chazi, the youngest and bravest of the dwarves, to go on this quest, and he travels for 1,000 years, more or less, to find the necessary thing, both through the supernal world and into the real world of men. If we were discussing it in the very Norse sense of the things, he would have traveled throughout the Yggdrasil and ended in Midgard to, in the end, to try to find what he wanted. On the last day before the quest ends, typical trope here, but effective, Chazi finds Thorgal resting outside of his village as he is thinking and daydreaming. And there appears to be what we know would be a lock nut around his neck, but Thorgal and everybody else just believes it's, just jewelry. Chazi tries to steal the lock nut from Thorgal, but he wakes up and catches him. The dwarf offers to buy it from him, but after he hears the story of the dwarf, Thorgal just decides to give it to him because he needs it more than he does. Chazi is a bit too tired to continue his journey, and he can't call upon his friend because it would warn Nidhogg's allies. So Thorgal decides to accompany him, carrying him. They stop for the night, and Thorgal explains where the jewel comes from. It comes from his destroyed escape pod, rescue pod, and was given to him by his family on his 6th birthday. Chazi believes at this point that it must come from the star, since it couldn't be found on Earth. When Thorgal wakes up, he wakes up in the supernal realm. Both the heroes have to sneak past a giant, but the giant is woken up by a passing bird and chases the duo. The giant grabs Thorgal, and Chazi rescues him by hitting him on his foot with a pick. Thorgal falls, but is rescued by one of Frigg's flying cat, and the two cats decide to take them to the Dwarven Kingdom. On their way, they're attacked by flying vampire snakes, some of Nidhogg's friends, I guess. One of the cat is killed, but the other one rescues the falling rider, and they end up in the cave leading to the Dwarf Kingdom. Thorgal is saddened by the death of the cat and pities the surviving one, but the other one just comes back saying, well, I have 9 lives, so I'm fine. It's another time where we see Thorgal's kindness in full display. The final challenge, blocking their way as they try to get to the Dwarven Kingdom, are the Tails of Nidhogg, which block their way by bursting out of the ground. Frigg summons a magical sword, which Thorgal grabs and yells,
by the power of Grayskull!
and turns into E-Man to fight off the snake's tails. Jazzy runs past and hands over the piece of jewelry to Nidhogg. But at the exact same time, Thorgal gets stabbed by one of the tails. All the other dwarves are celebrating, but Jazzy just runs back to Thorgal, seeing him laying on the ground dead. He starts mourning the death of his friend, but Frigg shows up and revives him, telling him that he would get a reward for his actions. Afterwards, Thorgal wakes up next to his village, and he gets the news that Gandalf's wife just gave birth to a little girl called Aricia. We have a nice little supernatural story here, even though there's that tiny bit of sci-fi element, and it gives us the origin of why Thorgal and Aricia's lives are completely in tuned. We're going to go through artistic element because there's not much paratext that's separate from what we've already seen. We get a very nice shot of Viking life, boat building. In this particular case, we've got the scene with family life as well in there. It's very nice to see that the author did take their time to understand Viking culture. There are things in there that are a bit out of line. The It's hard to see, but there is the dragon head or the monster head at the end of the boat here. Those would have been removed when the boats are in town, as to prevent that monster from attacking or disrespecting the village. It's not a perfect picture, but we get a very nice background. We get an extremely nice image here of what life would be in the ninth, 10th century, a little bit before the complete arrival of Christianity in Viking life. The transition to the magical realm is also really, really good. We have a nice color palette swap. It goes from purely natural colors, which we are used to this blue grass, to a yellow sky. It's a transition we know just by looking at the art that we have moved somewhere else, and somewhere that is not natural anymore. The supernatural creatures are also really well drawn and look really good. Even though the dwarves look a little bit like gardener gnomes, it's an interpretation that is usable. It's likable as well. The dog looks frankly terrifying, depending on which angle you put him in. The flying cats look pretty good. Where the wings would be, well, that's traditional art when creating mammals with wings, even though the wings would probably be a little bit lower on the back if it was an actual biological creature. That's an art thing to explain. You'd have to do a little bit of biology and evolutionary science for that, I guess. And the giant looks truly frightening with his 4 arms, his grisly, unkept beard. It looks like truly a monstrous creature. The goddess Frigg is also very beautiful and looks magical. It's something that is sometimes lost in modern comics, where they make gods and divine creature look too human. We have that big problem in the Marvel comic Thor, where while they are gods, they look too human in a way. Story elements. Well, the first thing we have to see here is, well, is this a dream sequence? Is this an actual adventure? This is a basic story element that's really easy to use and a trope that's employed numerous times, but it's employed really well here. And we do have the flow there of, well, he doesn't have that luck nut anymore at the end. So it must have been real. We see again the failures of leadership as the main driving element of the adventure. The Dwarf King loses his name because he is overconfident at playing checkers. That's clearly a failure of leadership. It's not as catastrophic as when Gandalf le Fou takes over the Northern Vikings, but it's a repeated trope and repeated theme throughout Thorgal's history. Kindness, courage are the two main values promoted by this story. And those are two very, very good value and very, very good things to try to pass on to younger readers going through the book and even to older readers. It's something that's enjoyable to read and enjoyable to take in. Another thing we have here, even it's the driving element of the story, but it's mentioned only in passing, is the importance of names. Names are extremely powerful, both in the classic tradition of Western culture, animism and paganism, and classical Christian doctrine. In the pagan tradition, the name brings you power, and owning a name gives you power over that thing. That's why weapons are given names. That's why boats were given names back then and are still given names now. It's an animistic tradition which has been kept since forever. Because if you have the name of a thing, you have power over it. Names are also critical in the traditional Christian tradition because it allows you to follow a lineage, follow a person's history, and then their son's history, their son's son's history. While we can also say that name gives you power over demons if you go through the Solomon Key, it's not as important as that naming lineage tradition, which is an important thing that drove Northmen, not only the Viking, but the Saxons and a lot of those northern, well, I'll use barbarian, to join Christianity because they were able to follow a lineage and tradition from it. They knew who God was because God was son of Joseph, which was son of etc., all the way back to the first Jewish kings, which is very important. And you can see in that Christian tradition as well, especially in the Northern traditions, that one of the reasons they joined Christianity was that they were able to appropriate one of those names from one of the tribes of Israel. As far as spacing goes, this is a 20-page story, so it's a longer story than part one. And we do have to give it a little bit of leeway because it's not a full book. But the adventure is very well paced, it's driven forward, the action never really stops. We have nice pages with almost no text, which show a lot of the action rather than telling us a lot of the action. Could this story have used more panels? Probably. But if you started adding other things, it would have gotten too heavy. It would have gotten too long after a while, and the pacing would have been hurt there. If you had managed to keep up the breakneck pace of this story, maybe you could have made it 22, 24 pages. But I feel that this would have hurt this particular work more than anything else. It's a very concise package that allows you to read the whole story quickly and move on to the next bit of Thorgal's youth history. Always great to get a supernatural story in Thorgal. I find those more interesting than the sci-fi ones. The real stories, or the stories that are closest to without any of those supernatural elements and such, I like those as well. So I'm not a huge fan of the sci-fi portion personally. I do prefer that supernatural element. The elements of Norse mythology are well woven here. They're well understood by the author. They're not just thrown in for flavor. So this is interesting as well. Story is less relevant to Thorgal than the other two stories in the book. The first one being how he was found as a child. The last one, which we'll discuss later, which is basically his origin. But it gives us a good understanding of who one of his main villain is going to be and why that villain will dislike him. And we get important traits from Thorgal is kindness, is generosity, is courage, which will continue throughout his life. I thank you very much for listening to me for this long. I hope we get through the third story later next week, possibly. Keep on reading comics, keep enjoying them. I'll keep analyzing them. I hope you have a very nice rest of your day. Bye bye.